let me go ahead and introduce our esteemed guests tonight, and then we will just kind of get into things. So we have Rebecca Deucher, who graduated in 2014. She graduated from here in 2014. Then she graduated from Georgetown University Law Center in 2019. While in law school, Rebecca worked as a student lawyer in Georgetown University's Appellate Litigation Clinic, as a law clerk for the D.C. Office of Disciplinary Counsel and the D.C. boutique firm Crowley, Hogue & Fine, did I get that right? PC, and as an intern for Judge Jennifer DeToro in the D.C. Superior Court. Post-graduation, Rebecca clerked for a federal judge in the Eastern District of Virginia. She then briefly worked in the Office of Chief Counsel for the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection before rejoining her old employer, Crowley, Hogue & Fine, in 2021. Rebecca's practice focuses specifically on litigating legal malpractice claims for plaintiffs. Rebecca currently sits as the vice chair of the Bar Association of the District of Columbia's Young Lawyers Section. That was odd. Okay, we're going to keep going. I'm going to power through all of these fun words. And by the way, we're going to have them kind of demystify some of the terminology that goes along with law and law school. All right, next we have Dominic Vieira, who graduated in 2012. So he graduated from here with a degree in history and a personal focus on constitutional law. He is a lifelong member in the Chester Bellac Debate Society. Yay. He received his JD, his Juris Doctor, from Regent University School of Law in 2020, after which he entered the Marine Corps to pursue a career as a Marine judge advocate. Due to an injury in training, Mr. Vieira returned to civilian life, first working as a public defender before becoming an associate with the firm of Mata & Hill in Front Royal, where he practices civil law. Mr. Vieira hopes to encourage the practice of reading the law in Virginia as a long-standing alternative to the current higher education model of law school. Love to hear more about that. All right, and then finally we have Phil Henke, who graduated in 2001 from Christendom. He currently focuses his practice on estate planning services. He is certified by the Supreme Court of Virginia as a guardian ad litem for incapacitated adults. Phil is a native of rural Nebraska and attended Christendom, where he received a BA in history and wrote his senior thesis under Dr. Carroll. He graduated from Ave Maria School of Law in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 2005, after which he was hired as an associate attorney at his current law firm, where in January of 2015, he became a partner. He lives in Manassas with his wife and 7 young children. He enjoys spending his free time with his family, attending church activities, reading, hunting, and following Nebraska football. He is a member of his parish finance council and is a member of the Knights of Columbus. Phil volunteers in pro bono activities such as the Wills for Heroes and Wills for Veterans program. So if you all will give them a round of applause for joining us tonight. I promise I will let them talk at some point. So I guess I was thinking, well, let me do this. Okay. Most of you in EFL, by the way, EFL is our 4-year career prep course that all students are required to take. So freshmen and sophomores, and I'm pretty sure at least juniors, or half of the juniors, have seen a careers booklet that Mr. McFadden and I put together. Does this look familiar? Yes? Okay, so there is a whole page on law if you did not get there yet. So it outlines just a little bit of the typical job duties, typical job titles as well, which hopefully you guys will share a little bit with us. What are the types of jobs, the different titles that you can get as a practicing attorney, as a lawyer, as somebody who does not go get their JD but is working in the legal field. And then, so yeah, what I want you all to do if you are interested in law school is check this out. And on the back, there is some information about the required testing, which is the LSAT, a little bit about law school in general, and a few law schools to consider that we've had students graduate from and go to. And then at some point tonight, we're going to talk about law school more. I want to hear from your all's perspective, because I have my perspective of trying to help them get in and research, but I'd love to hear from you all about it. So just a reminder that this exists. I can send it to you individually if you need it, so just email me if you lost your copy. Nobody lost their copy, right? You guys all have it. Hold on to it for dear life. Okay, so now on to our guests. So let's just kind of start with the basic question of how did you know you wanted to pursue law? Phil?
All right. Well, I took a course here by Professor Raphael Madden on jurisprudence, And that really was the first trigger that, in my mind, I thought it was super interesting how the course of constitutional law has progressed throughout our history. And so that was the first trigger for me after studying history and realizing that these were real stories from history that contributed to our legal system. And so that was it for me.
Yeah? Okay.
As I grew up in a family of a lawyer, my father is an attorney who's practiced before the United States Supreme Court. He's litigated at least 3 cases there, arguing largely in the field of labor law and the right to work on behalf of the Right to Work Association. So I grew up in a household where constitutional litigation was actually a tabletop topic. My personal decision to go to law school was very much a sense of coming to the end of the road and having nowhere else to go. So I thought, what the hell, I will apply and see what happens.
Do you recommend that?
Yes and no. Frankly, I never had much of a career path in the sense that I know you all are getting infused into you here. I knew many people in my class at Christendom and in classes above and below me who knew directly and exactly what they wanted to do from the moment they came out of the womb. But I had no such sense of direction, so my impetus took me in all sorts of different places. And eventually I came to the end of my options and decided that I would throw my lot in with the, how to put it, the unclean. And become a lawyer, at which point my father said, no, you'd do better to shoot yourself in the head.
Oh.
Just don't do that. So despite his recommendation, I decided I would follow that path, and this is where it's led me, up here.
Okay. This is the goal right
Yes.
here, to come back.
This is the culmination of my career in law, in case you're wondering.
All right, so Rebecca, tell us a little bit about how you figured out that you wanted to go to law school.
I would like to, my mic, my family will be laughing because the last thing I need is a microphone to make me louder. But yeah, I would like to start out with a disclaimer in the fact that whatever I might say, this is typical lawyer fashion, whatever advice I might give this evening comes with a disclaimer that I am still living my life and the test is still being run, so hold out maybe till the end and see how it takes me and the course through my life, but hopefully you find maybe a little bit of it helpful. But I do not come from a family of lawyers. Most people in my family are doctors or in the medical field. And frankly, until I took the same class with Professor Madden here, jurisprudence, I had never considered the law. I sort of just followed things that interested me each step of the way forward. And they do sort of say that God only shows so much of your future because if maybe you saw the whole thing, you wouldn't sign up. And I do think there's a reason he only ever tells me the next step. But I took that class, loved it. It was building off of the philosophy that I was taking at Christendom. And what I've come to find is that the law really is just practical philosophy. So for everyone who loves their philosophy classes but would like a little bit more reality to in those classes and a direction to take that interest, the law turned out to be exactly that for me. But I think besides that class, the other personal connection for me was working closely through the philanthropy board with Paul Jalcevic here, who was maybe the first lawyer I met. Mm-hmm. And this is how little I knew about it at the time. I didn't even know what JD stood for. So I saw that at the end of his name one day, and I looked it up, and I was like, I guess that's what they call these folks. So that's my story. So I came from pretty much square zero as far as the legal field goes.
Okay, so can you take a moment, somebody, to distinguish between why would you put JD after your name versus Esquire? So I've seen ESQ as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Personal preference, I think.
Okay, and what does Esquire mean? That means you've received your JD?
Esquire is a handle that's historically out of the English tradition. It's a remnant of the ties that we had with England, because once you became a lawyer in England, you actually became a member of the petty gentry. So you were no longer what was known as a commoner. You had certain writs which you were given, which allowed you to practice law in and under the king's authority. So that made you something more than just your average man. That's why you had this title, Esquire, which you could put after your name. You would have a Juris Doctorate depending on where you attended your school, at what university, and under whom you studied. But your power as an attorney was by gift of the king. It no longer is, however, but there is still the long-standing convention, just like we call judges Your Honor, is a long-standing convention actually out of the English system as well, which, according to some historians, is also derived from the French, which would make a lot of English people very unhappy to find that out. Nonetheless, that's what I understand the derivation to be.
Okay, thank you. I was not certain about that. So, all right, so let's kind of start at the beginning, because there's so many different things we can cover with practicing law, but first you have to get there, right? You have to get to law school. So talk to me about your process of figuring out where you wanted to go to law school and how you did the research, what factors you considered.
For me, I was interested in UVA Law School because I'd learned about it through Dr. Madden, and I really thought that their history was unique, and their student, I forget what they call it there, they have their own honor system there that's very unique. But at the time, Ave Maria Law School was opening up, and they were new, and I took a year off after college just to get a real job and work in an office for a while, which I think it's not a bad idea. Save up some money. And then Ave Maria was offering a lot of scholarships at the time, which also was very helpful. There are not quite as many scholarships anymore, but if you still have good GPA and LSAT score, there's still some good opportunities for you. But for me, at the time, I wasn't sure where I wanted to practice law or in what field I wanted to practice yet, so I thought Ave Maria was the best choice for me.
Okay, and before you guys chime in, if I haven't told you before, if you don't know, if you didn't read your handy dandy thing, your handout, you can actually receive a full tuition scholarship to Ave Maria Law School in Florida. So when you attended, it was in Ann Arbor,
That's
Michigan.
Right.
So it's now in Naples, Florida, and you can go for free and receive a $5,000 or $10,000 stipend depending on your LSAT score. So as long as you have the GPA, the LSAT score that you get in, you are accepted to the law school, you can go for free. So we actually have recent alumni, Justin Corman, who is studying down there right now.
And one more thing I'd like to say about that is if you are thinking, look to your future a little bit, because think about where you want to live. Where do you want to work? I still thought I might go back to Nebraska and find a job there, but they weren't interested in me. They wanted people who had attended the local Nebraska law schools. So it would have been very difficult to get a job back there. So here I am. And as fate would have it, it turned out pretty well. But my mom misses me. And so,
Yeah.
and I miss her, obviously. Hi, Mom. So that's one factor. Where do you want to live? And so that may be one factor for you. And then also, what type of career are you interested in? If you are interested in a type of career that would be sort of pro-life or other Catholic causes, then a Catholic law school is probably a great idea for you. You can network with the people there and get some extra training that might be helpful for that type of career.
Okay, and I want to come back to that question about where you want to live and practice in the future. Yes, so.
Yeah, do you have something? I was just going to add 2 examples because I think that was a good outline of how you might approach it. I will just start saying there's a lot of talk in the legal field about school ranks, and people get really stuck on that. And I will say there's some truth to the fact that the higher ranking schools get opportunities that other schools may not, and I've seen that firsthand because I started out in law school at Catholic University of America School of Law, and they have a beautiful campus. I then, after my first year, transferred to Georgetown and finished at Georgetown. So I did see a difference, I will say, from my experience, the opportunities that came to certain students at different schools. And I have heard from other students at higher schools. So there's some truth to the fact that T14 or higher get clerkship opportunities open to them before they're even open to other schools or even spoken of. But with that being said, I think I had some of the best teachers I've had in my legal education at CUA. So there's that aspect that there's teachers everywhere that can invest in students and teach them the exact same thing and maybe even better. Or we'll say the contracts professor and the English writing professor at CUA did a better job teaching me actual law instead of whatever they taught at Georgetown, where you get some of these professors who are maybe a little too in the books and too in theory that they forget they're supposed to teach what's on actually law. But we can get into the weeds on that, but I think I wanted to offer as an example that there depends on the direction you want to go, or you think you want to go, and what opportunities you might need in law school, but then also where you want to end up. And if you want to be local, if you know, for instance, you want to practice law in Pittsburgh, it would really be in your interest to go to a local school that's going to offer you a good like financial package and make that career more accessible to you, the directions you want to go, because obviously you come out with loans and have to take that into consideration. So definitely think about where you want to practice, and that'll open up other schools and maybe other scholarship money to you that maybe the T14 would not.
Right, and speaking
Sorry,
as...
can you just say what's T14?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
T14, if you've done a little bit of digging, you will definitely come across this in Google, because lawyers love prestige and they will talk about it all day. T14 is the top 14 schools in the country, and whether or not you subscribe to how they rank these schools, they're considered the top 14 in the country. And Yale and Harvard, I think, are vying for 1 and 2 every year. I got to Georgetown. I love talking about this because I got to Georgetown the year after they regained their T14 status, and I was hearing horror stories of parents calling the school freaking out because their school had slipped to the 15th in the country. And I was like, oh, we got bigger fish to fry. But some people, it's important. So I think unless someone else has something to add, that's the ranking.
Yeah, as far as considering the rankings go, I think that the school that I went to is, strictly speaking, low on the rankings in books. I had never heard of this school before at Regent University in Virginia Beach. It's a non-denominational Christian university, I think begun in the 1970s, and the law school is an outgrowth of that, Robertson School of Law. And I chose that school largely because I went there, saw the staff, interacted with the staff, and was duly impressed with the quality. I also had the opportunity to speak with the former president of that school because my father knew him from his work in law. So I had a phone conversation with him to be able to compare the 2 schools that he had been president of at one time or another. The first was Liberty University down in Lynchburg, and then this other one was Regent University. So I got his unique perspective on both of those, and eventually chose Regent primarily because they offered me a full scholarship at the time. They were able to do so, and offered me a generous package. And second, because I really liked what I saw about the faculty and the quality of the staff. So one thing I will also say, when you are evaluating a school, look to the career office, because that's where the networking opportunities are really going to sprout from. The people who are willing to work on your behalf to find you connections, to find you opportunities for internships, for connections for mentors, local judges who have clerkships open. All of that is going to be made available through people who do hard work for you and are paid to do so by the institution. There is certainly merit to the top 14 analysis, where the good old boys network is loud and proud and long and strong. It's just a fact of life. People are going to know more people who've been to Harvard in upper tier areas than are going to have known people who went to Liberty University, et cetera. However, that's a diagram that's starting to break down and deconstruct, because I think largely people are seeing that these schools are not paying as close attention to the quality of education that they're giving anymore, and the suspicion of that is growing and starting to spread people's attention to other areas. So I would highly recommend look at the schools in your area first, as has been said, because that's where you're going to find the local opportunities which will serve you best if you want to stay local. If you want to practice in something like federal law and perhaps work at the appellate level, find a school that's going to be in with your circuit. Find a school that's going to be able to reach into the Supreme Court, if that's what you're looking to do. Regent University boasted of the fact that they had ins at the Supreme Court to be able to get you clerkship opportunities there, which is quite an achievement for a school of their size and their age. that was the kind of thing which impressed me. And the staff never stopped working for all of the students who came to them with any request whatsoever. So I would highly encourage you to look out for what the school is going to offer you beyond the education in terms of the services, connections, networking that they provide, because that will be primarily where you step off from law school.
Awesome. Okay, that is really helpful. So can we come back to where you want to be in the future, so where you'd want to practice? How does that factor in with the bar exam? Because what I've heard is you probably want to study in the state that you're going to take the bar exam because they're going to prepare you better. Is this true? Is this, what have you all
I think it's true.
experienced?
Having gone to Ave Maria in Michigan, focused more on Michigan law. So I came and took the Virginia bar exam, and I was missing out on a lot, but the bar prep course got me ready.
Okay,
So-
and so I assume there's a bar prep course kind of built into
Everywhere,
law
yeah.
school?
Nope, it's
And
separate, and
Totally separate.
you have to arrange that on your own.
Not necessarily, if I may interject
sure,
at
go
the
ahead.
point, as Regent
might not
University actually was one of the schools that partnered with several bar preparation programs in my time there. So depending on what school you go to, they may have arranged to have a bar preparation program which they are prepared to provide to you. You may choose your own. It's not something which is necessarily required of you to choose one program or the other, but in my case, Regent added an extra charge to each semester's tuition to have a fully paid for bar prep program ready and waiting for me if I chose to choose that, if I chose that program. Otherwise, I would get the money refunded and be able to turn it into whichever program I thought helped me prepare for the bar better. Another thing to throw into the consideration about the uniqueness of each bar exam,
Yeah.
depending on your jurisdiction, that's not always the case, because there are a growing number of jurisdictions which have what's known as the UBE, the Universal Bar Exam. And that is, I believe it's in the neighborhood of 23 different jurisdictions which accept that, which means that you have, if you reach a certain score on the UBE, you have a transferable bar license between those jurisdictions as long as you're paying your dues and you get in with the bar in that state. Virginia does not accept the UBE. Virginia and California particularly have a very unique bar exam structure. They are generally accepted to be the two most difficult bar exam jurisdictions, although that is slightly changing in Virginia and has slightly changed over the past couple of years. But the primary consideration is if you want a transferable bar license, you want to consider taking the bar in a UBE jurisdiction. If you live in Maryland, Virginia, you could take it in D.C., and that would give you the opportunity to have a transferable license to any other UBE jurisdiction. But if you just take the Virginia bar like I did, you're stuck with Virginia unless you get reciprocity with another state, and that is entirely dependent on the decision of each of those other states to either allow you reciprocity and on what terms they allow that.
So I'm living this right now because I took the Virginia bar and thought it would make me more marketable, which I think in some way it did, because in the DMV area, people prefer to take Maryland or DC. There's just less rules around how to take it and when to take it, so people perceive it as easier. And I took Virginia and have since gotten engaged and will be moving up to, I know, thank you so much. But unfortunate for me, I'm moving up to Boston with my fiance in the next year, and I will have to take the Massachusetts bar because Virginia is not accepted anywhere and they do not accept anyone, the bar license. So I will be taking that bar exam. If I were a couple more years into practice, I know in Massachusetts, they recognize, as many states, it's usually like 3 to 5 years in practice. They'll recognize you, overlooking the fact that you've not taken their bar. And they may have other requirements, such as in the case with UBE states, they'll take a portion of the bar that you took. They'll take your score, but you still might have to sit for a small portion of the exam. So it's not uncommon. Actually, it's not uncommon for people to take multiple bars right out of law school. Or to take them throughout the practice. I've heard stories of some folks, like actually just recently a partner from Boston moving down and having to sit for a bar exam. So it's unfortunate, but it sometimes happens. So you can only be so strategic. You probably are only just considering law and may not know what area you want to practice. So there's only so much thought you can put into this. But.
Sure, but if you know you want to stay in Virginia forever, you might as well go to a Virginia school, get prepped for the bar exam in Virginia. So how long does it take to prepare for the bar exam? And so like you graduate, right, in May, I assume, and then how long does it take before you're ready to take the bar exam? Is that?
About
a month?
month and a half.
Yeah.
Okay,
Depends
so
how
this
much
isn't
you
a
Depends on the program.
terribly long process.
Out of region, we were given 6 to 8 weeks.
That you have to
yeah.
take it?
Well, no, it was depending in the first place on when you want to take the bar exam. Because your graduation in May, the bar usually sits in Virginia in July. So you
Okay.
have a period of approximately 2 months in which to fulfill your requirements to complete the bar preparation course.
Sure.
Right? And that will serve you in whatever capacity and effort that you put into it. But the bar exam sits in July, so your time frame is determined by the period between your graduation and the date of the bar exam itself.
Okay.
Now, you can stretch that out by, I believe there's an additional sitting in February, if I'm not mistaken. So you could stretch out your time and work as an intern for a law firm in the period immediately following, so you can continue to prep, do 2, 3 bar prep courses if you feel it's necessary for yourself and your pocketbook can stand it, and your mental stamina. But that would be up to you. The requirement that you sit for the bar is itself a movable target.
The bar exam is a minimum competency test.
Right.
The problem with that is you don't want to have to do it again. So you'll throw yourself in for a month to prepare or a month and a half to prepare, so you never have to do this again. That's really. And you might do that and then meet someone and have to move and have to do it again. So it's all
You just
life.
never know. So let's talk a little bit more about testing. Let me remind you if you don't know this already, but the Career Development Office, I will reimburse you for taking the LSAT, the MCAT, the GRE, any of these graduate school entrance exams that you have to take. So the LSAT costs $200 right now, and I do have study materials in my office. I have resources that I can point you to. Khan Academy Online has an entirely free LSAT prep course that you can do yourself, and it gives you a diagnostic test so you can kind of see where you're at, which areas do you need to work on. So make sure that you come and see me if you want to go to law school so that we can talk about the kind of timeline, which actually maybe that would be beneficial for you all. I mean, you kind of said you took a year off, you let the cards fall where they may. Rebecca, maybe you had a more, direct timeline, but what is kind of the timeline? I tell most students, summer after junior year is when they want to take the LSAT because they need to have a little bit extra time if they want to score higher and possibly need to take it again. So does that sound accurate?
Sounds wise. I'm glad you brought that up because I did also work for a year and a half and then did the Camino, so I wasn't working for a bit of the summer, which everyone do the Camino. That's an incredible experience. But I did work for a year and a half in Chicago at a law firm that does pro-life work, Thomas More Society, and yeah, they're great. It's a great network, good lawyers. I think it was very formative for me to work with lawyers who saw their job as a vocational call instead of whatever else you might find in law school. And I did that because I'm a commitment phobe, and going there, I could test out whether I really wanted to do law. I highly recommend working, this might go against what you're advising.
Nope.
But I actually recommend working after law school because I think any real life experience only aids you in law school because, as I said, law is practical philosophy. So if you understand a bit more about life, you understand why things might be the way they are and why we make laws. And I found the classmates that asked the best questions were the ones who had real life experience. So there's some, if you are feeling a little uncertain and not sure, I'd encourage you to consider some sort of career after undergrad that lends itself to discerning the legal profession and would only help you on your applications because law schools also appreciate that experience. So I did go to Chicago for a year and a half and while there studied and took the LSAT. So that was kind of my path, and I definitely encourage everyone to consider that really if you're hesitant about making this leap. It's a big commitment.
Sure. So I want to kind of switch gears a little bit. And Phil, can you talk to me about jobs that don't require a JD? Because you all are kind of saying go work in the field a little bit, but how do they get jobs? Because aren't most of the law internships that we would see posted for law students?
You can work as a paralegal, and it's not too difficult to get a paralegal certificate.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 semesters, college level material. So that's good experience. And that can get you a feel for how a law firm works and some of the work that you will be helping attorneys to do. And so that can help you decide whether or not you want to make the big commitment for law school.
You can also work as an office assistant. That takes no requirements at all. And as long as you're good at scheduling and sometimes taking dictation, otherwise being able to handle paperwork and are responsible enough with the transfer of sensitive items, you'll be getting a very good feel for what the day-to-day activities of a law school, of a lawyer's life actually entail. And depending on the size of the firm you go to, the volume of that may increase or decrease. But your day is largely going to be centered around the activities of the lawyer. So you'll see all of that. You'll be booking meetings. You'll be hearing clients give their potential clients give their sob stories and telling them, well, we can't have too much information about this necessarily at this point without creating an attorney-client relationship. But let's hear out, the basics. So you're going to have to develop people's interpersonal skills. You're going to have to develop all sorts of secretarial skills, for lack of a better way of saying it, as well as getting a feel for the direction that cases may be going. And you can certainly branch out from that office work into a paralegal certificate, and from there possibly even a mentorship with a lawyer.
That was the position I had in Chicago, was admin assistant, but it turned paralegal because the office at that time, they've since expanded greatly, but it was at that time a small office, and they needed assistance you wore many hats. But off of the admin assistant, another position you might look into, or any role at a courthouse, there are a lot of different jobs there, and truly courthouses are extremely exciting if you are interested in the law, and working closely with a judge or whatever body in the part of the courthouse you're working would be extremely helpful in going to law school. So I know the judge I clerked for after law school had a judicial assistant. They sometimes have different names for them, but she honestly knew more than some students I met in law school. She had been there for a long time, but she had a great front row seat to any trial that was going on. So I would definitely consider going that route if you wanted to test something out first.
And what about legal researcher? I feel like I've seen that, or a research assistant or something like that.
Depending on what the lawyer's needs may be, yeah. You could certainly have a position doing that, and you would get a feel for what the essence of law school is, because law school is essentially 1 3-year appointment to being a legal researcher, so that you can take a test which is not going to allow you to use that skill which you actually spent 3 years learning how to use. So don't really get me started on the bar exam as a requirement for the practice, but anyway.
Before he discourages you. But yeah, the paralegal point is a good one. I have a friend who's considering law school right now, and she's looking into paralegal positions. There are, honestly, every firm I talk to, someone at that firm says they need a paralegal. So in particular, DC, there are a lot of law firms.
Paralegals are always in demand.
Yeah.
If you're interested in criminal law, consider becoming a police officer. I've known several lawyers who used to be police officers, and they're great. Some of them become prosecutors, but some turn to the dark side and become criminal defense attorneys, and they're great.
Actually, what just happened in my home state, North Carolina, a retired police officer just became a magistrate judge. So some states elect their judges, and a fun fact is that you do not need to be a lawyer to be a judge. Some positions in the legal field, ironically, are not guided by the law. It's just tradition and closely held tradition, and those are privileged positions that are held closely, so you will almost never see a non-lawyer get one of those positions. But some states, so we're talking state instead of federal court, but in North Carolina they're elected, and a retired police officer was just elected as a magistrate.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, 2 quick questions back to law school really quickly before we get into like the day-to-day, because that's what I'm sure you all want to know more of, what you actually do day-to-day. What does it look like? What was my question about law school? Is it true that the first year of law school pretty much across the board is pretty much the same curriculum? So at any school you go to, you're learning.
In theory, I will say
In theory, okay.
my comment about Georgetown. Georgetown has different sections, and I entered as in the transfer section. There are 1 or 2 sections that are their experiments almost, where they have these ways of rethinking contracts or rethinking property law, and you end up coming out. It's extremely, I would say, extremely liberal, and you kind of wonder what they learn in there, because after talking to those students, I could take the test better, and I went to a different school. So I think be cautious, actually, looking at schools and maybe ask that question. I think a few students ended up in those sections by accident, but most of them knew what they were signing up for and really wanted to do that, which on them. But it's not going to be on the bar, that's all, or in practice, really. But that is a good question, because that's not always the case, as I learned.
Okay.
In general, it's just the fact that the Board of Bar Examiners has, or the ABA, excuse me, has standards which are required of any accredited law school. So you have to have a certain amount of time in contracts, in constitutional law, in property, and 3, I think, other predominant torts, and several other predominant areas over which there is generally accepted practice because of the common law tradition, which essentially has affected every state in the Union, even though that there are some statutory changes which have occurred over the years, and revisions which have been made in the laws that are universally recognized and adopted in part, and adopted entirely. So the law is, as Rebecca has kept pointing to, is just one big practical experiment. And I think that's something to bear in mind. You're going to be going to jurisdictions where people are essentially working without a single clue as to what they're really doing, because for one reason or another, the legislature is attempting to pass this particular law. So for all intents and purposes, one aspect of your practice is about to be entirely upended, and you don't have any say in the matter outside of what your vote has done in the prior election, right, and what may occur in the future. So you have to be able to dance a really pretty dance sometimes when it comes to being a lawyer. So the fact that there is this universality is something which is helpful, and you will encounter it in basically every law school, but there are going to be nuances which your choice of school is going to be addressing because of the locale that it's in, which would not be addressed if you were going to a school in a different jurisdiction, right? For example, going to a school in Virginia, I was constantly getting, at least in part, the way the Virginia way of doing things according to certain aspects of the common law of property or the common law of torts. But that was almost always set up in a little rock box of what the rest of the country is doing. And I'm sitting there in class thinking, I'm not going anywhere else. I came to a Virginia school because I wanted to learn about Virginia law. I really don't care what Colorado is doing in terms of whether, touching a man's plate that he's holding at the lunch counter counts as assault. I really don't want to know whether Colorado considers that assault. I want to know whether Virginia considers that assault. So the ultimate issue is on you. Is you have to be aware of what's being taught, the qualifications that lie under what's being taught, and how your school is viewing and your teacher is viewing what's being taught. Those are all 3 really important factors to consider, because, again, as Rebecca pointed out, your professors may be coming to that class with entirely bananas ideas about what the law should be rather than what the law currently is, and what perhaps philosophically justice might require. And that's the aspect of the practical experiment, and you're going to be faced with that every day. And if you walk in with the attitude of, oh, well, they're just going to teach me what the law generally says, you're going to be blindsided and really end up with your face in the mud.
Okay. All right, so let's go back to, one last question about law school. Probably not the last, but maybe. So Phil, you mentioned that you got a scholarship, and Dominic, same with you. So Rebecca, how did you pay for school? Now, actually, were they full scholarships that you all got, or did you end up still having to take out loans?
Mine was full, but I still had to borrow money for living expenses.
Living expenses, okay.
Same.
That's important to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm still paying it off. So.
Okay. Yes, so I want to get to that part of how that all works.
Yes, I am still paying it off, but 2 points on this that I'd like to make really quickly. I made the decision going into the law as I was following each step and realizing I enjoyed Madden's class. I enjoyed studying for the LSAT, as weird as that sounds. But it's not weird because it's logic, and if you like that, you're gonna like law school. And so it all just sort of made sense. And I made the commitment that I was willing to do this, even if it meant paying off law school for the rest of my life. And I think that is not an unreasonable thing to decide because I would rather do something I enjoy than a job that keeps me out of debt. And I think I would encourage you all to sort of look at it that way because if you're considering law, there's a hint of something that you enjoy there and some things are worth investing in. And it's not a crazy investment because a lot of people make it and do actually pay off law school. So as scary as debt might sound, it's something that's manageable and there's ways to minimize that. The other point I wanted to make was that even just by living your life, you might find ways to pay off law school. So the plug I made for the Camino, I received a scholarship to CUA, for the competition I wrote about the Camino, and it turns out that the priest who judges the scholarship personally had done the Camino and loves the Camino. So I think, sure, the Holy Spirit, but also I went on the Camino and the Holy Spirit went with me. So I think you should live your life and cards will fall where they will, and I do think God provides. So I went to CUA, saved a lot of money doing that as well, and transferred. So there's also the transfer aspect that if you go to a school that's cheaper than Georgetown, which is the most expensive school in the country at this point in time and probably will not change, you can save money by transferring as well.
Okay, that's helpful. I know, just to give you all a heads up, with going back to UVA, you're interested in that. UVA actually has a scholarship through their law school it's a privately funded scholarship, and depending on the year and the cycle, and if somebody's currently receiving the scholarship, it's not available, but if nobody is currently using it, somebody from one of 4 Newman Guide schools is eligible to receive that scholarship, and Christendom is one of them. Excellent. So UVA should also go on your list if you are interested in law school, simply because that scholarship does exist. I think they're like $60,000 a year, and the scholarship is like 10 or 15, something like that. So, and I also wanted to say we have two recent grads that, Justin Corman is going to Ave Maria on a full ride because of Ave Maria's tuition scholarship that they offer for all Newman Guide schools. We have 2 other recent grads who are on full rides based on merit. So their LSAT scores, their GPAs, their applications, et cetera, got them into Baylor and George Mason, which is the Antonin Scalia School of Law at George Mason. So just so you know that it's totally possible to get a full ride to law school. And then also it's possible to pay off loans if it comes to that. So I don't want you all to be scared about those parts of it. I'm willing to help.
Yeah, take the government's approach and do some deficit spending.
No, truly, actually, someone's advice is that they don't tax debt. So that's, if you ever heard of the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I'm starting it, but I've heard from many people that it was life-changing, and I would highly recommend it based off of their recommendation. But yes, I would recommend that, and it helps your approach and your perception of debt.
Right, and part of it also is you're going to have to go into debt for something sometime. And if you don't have experience dealing with debt in a smaller way, like in a capacity of around, for myself, $80,000, right, which is more debt than I've ever been in my entire life. I now am facing the prospect of buying a house, which is at least 3 to 5 times as much as that and more, with increasing interest rates, a family to provide for, working in a relatively small community with somewhat limited resources. So if you've never taken the step of going into debt before, and some of you I'm sure have looked that debt in the face even coming here, despite all that is done to help alleviate that, that's something that you have to come to grips with. At some point or other, you are going to be facing debt, and if it cripples you, what good are you going to be to anybody? You have to be able to face that down. Now, that's not to say that you become reckless with it. I just waltzed into the debt and woke up one morning with $80,000, in the hole, and decided that I needed to get a job in the field that I had chosen. So
It's hard to give advice to a room full because, we don't know what your personal spending habits are, and I
Exactly.
hope they're not that.
exactly. And
but-
I also want to point out that when I went to law school, I was 2 years married with 2 children. And by the time I left law school, I had 4 children. And my 4th child was born the week after I finished the bar exam. So a big consideration is, again, depending on your state in life, you have to look at not only where you are, but where you will be taking your family and what that will do to your family when you enter into that particular stage of life. So recommendations for doing law school when you're single are higher, but do not just give up the idea of law school because you didn't go straight out of college. I didn't go straight out of college. I never thought I would necessarily go at all. And I ended up going, again, 2 years married, 2 kids, walk out 4 kids, and then found out through a series of mishaps that I have waltzed out of 2 jobs that were hopefully going to provide for my family over a 2-year period. So it's not something which you can ever foresee. And so I highly recommend the attitude of, if you're going to do it, just go gung-ho and don't think about it anymore. You'll figure out how to pay it off as long as you're acting responsibly. That's the big takeaway.
That's good advice. I wanted to, because you'd mentioned the Newman Guide, I don't know if you're going to go this direction, but I wanted to maybe address I have discovered this elephant that's sometimes in the room at Christendom through discussions with friends and alum, but I wanted to address the Georgetown question of whether Georgetown's identity is Catholic or not, and some schools. I just want to fully address it because I think this is something that you might run into. We all came to Christendom for a reason. We all have certain beliefs, and we want to live our lives according to those beliefs, and would love to have faculty and staff support us in that endeavor. The shock I experienced going to law school was not that everyone wasn't Catholic. It was that I went from philosophy, which is the love of learning, to competitive learning. And that was very jarring, I will be honest. They do hide books behind bookshelves at some schools. I talked to librarians because I couldn't believe it. Did some of my own reporting on the issue. But so it's competitive, and that aspect you just can't really get around. But I do think I grew through that. The part about Catholicism, I wanted to share this because I did, I think, personally experience, we're talking a lot of professional considerations, but you are a person and you will be growing in this career, hopefully towards our goal, which is heaven. And I do, in fact, think going to Georgetown helped me get closer to that mark. And I think it did that because it was more of a purgation and trial. But I do think I actually had my prayer life grew while at Georgetown. And I think I experienced God in a different way there, and I am so grateful for that time. So if there's anything at the back of your mind, whether it's your own conscience or your parents' concern, that is actually, if you feel called to certain things and through prayer discern that's for you, you should actually do that because it might be the exact thing you need to get to that next step in your life. So just wanted to put that out there. There are anti-Catholic groups at some of these schools, and sometimes the school does nothing to support you in that. There was an instance, as an example, of the chapel at the law school is like the size of a closet, and the Catholic chapel with the Eucharist. And I would go there very frequently to pray about all these exams. And in the corner of the chapel, which is the size of a closet, there was a Muslim prayer rug that would sometimes be unrolled or sometimes rolled up. And I am all for everyone practicing whatever religious belief they have, but they do have a Muslim prayer room at Georgetown. And the fact that the Catholic prayer room was also like supporting someone, it really bothered me. So I talked to the priest about it and didn't find much support there. So there are, I think, individuals who fear being truly acting true to their faith. So you will not be supported in that truly, but you're not going to law school to reconfirm your faith. I think you already have it. That's one reason you're here. So I would approach this from a professional development perspective and recognize that God works through all things and that you actually might discover him there.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sorry, that
yeah,
was my...
No, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you all appreciated that too. So, okay, I need to check the time because, okay, just want to make sure we're keeping on task here. Let's totally switch gears and talk about the day-to-day stuff. So tell us about your day-to-day life. What does it look like? You know, how early are you getting up? Do you have one specific office you're going to? Are you going to the courthouse ever? What does it look like for you?
I usually get to work around 8:30 and probably come home around 6:30 on the average day. I have 2 or 3 meetings with clients. Sometimes they're new clients I'm meeting for the first time, and we're talking about their needs and their options and giving them advice, then seeing if they want to hire me. Sometimes I'm meeting with clients to finalize our work, our legal documents. Maybe we prepared some wills or related documents. So we're going to do a final review and go over any final questions and get those completed. A lot of phone calls and emails out the wazoo.
Yeah.
And we have started doing more Zoom meetings since COVID pandemic.
Okay.
I go to court probably once every other week or so, and I have trials maybe twice a year. So I could be in court all week on that trial. So once or twice a year I have those big trials. So it's a bit of a variety. I like the fact that I live close to my home, so I can go home for lunch and have my baby girl sit on my lap while I eat my lunch and chat with my wife.
Yeah.
And also, in my position, I have some flexibility in my schedule, so if there are events that my children are involved in, I can make sure my calendar is working for that. So I may have to work late to make up for that later, but that's okay. So I have a bit of a flexible schedule, so I like that.
What issues do you find you have to litigate more?
Sometimes we have contested wills and probate actions. Mom died, and she had a homemade will, and it's ambiguous, and we have to figure out what it means. Or Mom signed a will when she was really old, and she wasn't very well, and she disinherited some of her children, and those children are now fighting it, of course.
You laugh, but it's true.
So we see these, emotional situations. But sometimes people just need their day in court, and then you present the best case, and the judge or the jury just makes their decision. So going to court is part of my work. Sometimes we just have a quick hearing to present, everyone agrees on this, judge, let's sign this order. That's great. But you still have to go to court. But for the most part, I'm in my office reviewing documents, typing documents, answering questions by email and phone, and prioritizing my work, making sure I'm on top of the work that needs to get done and meeting my deadlines.
Okay.
And then as a partner in a law firm, I also have some administrative things to do as well.
So yeah, I wouldn't say that my day-to-day, even as an associate, really differs much from that. A lot of what you are doing as a lawyer is providing client service, and you're doing that as an intermediary between 2 groups, right? The client and the state, at least on one level or another. And often in between that, you're going to be working with counsel for another party, and if you're involved in something which is really disputatious, like grandma's will, that can be the kind of thing which can only be settled by a neutral arbiter. But sometimes they can be taken out of court, and there can be a settlement on the issues, depending, again, largely on the temperament of each of the clients and how that is affecting the temperament of the lawyers who are representing them. So in my day-to-day, generally speaking, I largely end up answering a lot of emails. I'll answer telephone queries that are coming from clients. I don't normally interview clients. As an associate, I do more or less what my partners tell me to do. I'm starting to branch out a little bit more out of that. I've been with my current firm for a year, so I'm starting to branch out more, and I've been given recently permission to start hoeing my own row, as it were, for clients and bringing in my own people to represent at whatever level or in whatever matter I, generally speaking, find to work. So what I may end up doing in the near future is opening up my practice in this firm to criminal defense, which is sort of my first job because of the way that things worked out. This is the first time I ever went to court officially was as a prosecutor with a third-year practice certificate when I was in law school. I was doing a practicum, and I served as an intern with the Norfolk the Norfolk Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. And so I did my first work there, which involved probation hearings, essentially, and bail hearings as well. So determining whether somebody who has just been arrested should stay in jail until his hearings and in terms of bail. And on the other hand, in probate hearings, determining whether somebody who is currently under the court's eye because he has been convicted of something and is serving a sentence outside of jail should go back to jail because he's violated the terms of good behavior which he was required to hold. In the public defender's office, I did largely the same thing in court, but from the other angle. So I was trying to argue that this person who had just run over 3 people, with his car while in a drunken state should be let out of jail because he has a wife and children of his own that he needs to provide for. Not an uncommon thing. But the point being that my day-to-day shifted largely from a lot of court experience because as a public defender you are forever in and out of court or the jail and interviewing clients to the civil side, which is very much more relaxed in terms of what your demands and your appearances in court are like. A lot of it does have to do with administrative things where you are simply putting before the judge that you have reached this step in the process, you are either in agreement or disagreement, you state your case, and the judge lays down his decision, and then you move on from there until you get to trial. Trial is pretty much the block that sits atop this massive pyramid of all the other work that you do in preparing your case and moving through your case. And quite often it's the block that never gets put on top of the case, on top of this particular construction, because for one reason or another, your client decides it's not worth it, the other side decides it's not worth it, or what have you.
Most cases settle,
Right.
actually, depending on, you can break the numbers down however you want, but there are different type areas of the law that don't settle as frequently, but most cases settle now because it is so expensive to litigate.
Okay.
I've also been to jail many times.
That's an experience.
It's quite jarring when that door clinks behind you and you're just walking back there with the deputy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, definitely. It was a culture shock for me. I had never met anybody who had been to jail. I'd never been inside a jail. I'd never met anybody who had done drugs, who had been addicted to drugs,
Or
who
lied
had
to-
alcohol
And they lie to
problem.
you all the time.
Right.
Actually, someone you could look into, a professor that I had at Georgetown had an incredible story. His name's Sean Hopwood, and he did an interview for, I think, 60 minutes, 90 minutes? What is that show? Is it
60
9? Is it
minutes,
60
yeah.
minutes? How many
They
minutes did I
haven't extended
spend?
it yet.
But he did an interview for them because he grew up in the Midwest, Christian family, like I don't remember what his stint was before his bank robbery stint, but he then went to jail for that and spent a couple years there and came out, and he's now teaching law at Georgetown, which is an incredible turnaround for anyone's career.
Right.
And he got there because he started representing prisoners as a jailhouse lawyer and talks a lot now about, I would say he's truly a bridge builder in DC because a lot of more left-leaning individuals focus on prisoners' rights and issues like that, and for some reason cast conservatives as not caring about prisoners. So he does a good job, I think, because he grew up in the Midwest and understands conservatives, drawing a conversation between the two. And so his class was incredible to take. But if you look him up online, there's interviews he's done talking about his time in jail. And it's pretty interesting. It is a culture shock, but he does a good job, I think, articulating it in a way that people could understand. So plug
Okay.
for him.
Yeah. So Rebecca, did you want to share a little bit about your day today?
No, I just do what the partner tells me.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, so we're unfortunately quickly running out of time, but I would love
That's
to
what
hear
happens
all
when you engage
lawyers.
lawyers. Yeah.
right.
No.
Right. hope we have kept a captive audience, though, so we'll keep going for a little while. And then we will give you all a chance to ask some questions.
You have the right to remain silent.
I would love to hear a little bit about what are maybe some of the biggest struggles that you've had and some of the biggest successes that you've had. So wherever you want to start. Anybody?
I tried to think of an answer to this one because when the question was sent over email, it's difficult to say because lots of the things which I thought I would struggle with, I didn't end up really struggling with. I had very different struggles. What I first anticipated would be one of my issues is the question of defending the person I know to be guilty when I ended up going to the public defender's office. You're literally standing in front of somebody who has not only told you in client confidence that, yes, I did shoot up with heroin, yes, I did encourage that fellow to shoot up with heroin, and yes, he died using the heroin that I told him to shoot up with. But he told the police that that's what he did, right? So how do you present to the judge or to a jury of anyone of common sense that there is some merit or some possible reason to look with anything other than contempt on this person who has just admitted to the course of facts which you just related? And it's a commonly asked question that I got when I was in the public defender's office from people who I knew. It was like, how do you defend the guilty party? And so that had never been a question which I'd wrestled with very much before going into law school, because the generally accepted reason that I gave myself was, well, it's part of the system. Does that make it right? Is the question that immediately followed that once I started to practice in the public defender's office. I think the greatest challenge that I have in civil litigation is running the line between a desire for profit and a desire for service. Because when you're in civil litigation, right, people are bringing to you some very personal problems. And one of the things which you are engaging to do is to help facilitate solutions to those problems in exchange for money. Now, and that runs the risk of becoming very mercenary. And one of the things which you may encounter in law school is the discovery that lawyers, after dental technicians, I believe, are the number 2 suicides for the professions. And that's because there is a significant disconnect in lawyers at large between their personal ambition and the integrity which they know is supposed to be a part of the position that they are given by the clients who take them on to serve them. So that balance between what am I doing simply for the money and what am I doing to help the client is something which you may end up struggling with, as many lawyers do. I know I am at this point. Because, yes, you need to be able to, support a family. You've got to support the members of your firm who are, if you're a partner, I'm sure this is something you struggle with, is making sure that the people who are working for you are being paid a sufficient wage to help them in the circumstances that they're in. And you have to be able also to provide a service to your clients. But that's the primary thing. I've often ranted at my wife, God bless her for her patience, that the professions I think that should be unpaid are doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs, right? Because as a lawyer, again, you are wanting to avoid becoming a vicious avatar simply for the basest desires of your client so that you can appear to be doing everything that's conceivably possible on behalf of your client while still just taking and sucking away all of their revenue, because that's what you're really after, is supporting your own existence, right? So, I mean, that's right now, I would say, one of my chief struggles, which, again, I never anticipated having to face when I was going to law school.
For me, that's just to be brief, there's basic administrative types of struggles where you have to get your work done and be on time because you have ethical rules that you can violate and lose your job. You can lose your license if you miss deadlines and you have bar complaints against you. So that's a lot of stress. So you have to be organized and prioritize your work. Another big struggle has been sometimes with the types of cases where you have family members suing each other. It can be, you can sometimes bring on their stress onto yourself if you're not careful. And in a certain sense, we're humans, and we empathize with people who are going through deep personal struggles. This is, the worst struggle of their life often, and you're there, and so the stakes are sometimes very high. So you have to watch your stress level and be careful about that. Make sure you're balancing your life out. So those are, in my view, some of the biggest struggles.
Briefly, my biggest struggle has been to ask for time off. I feel badly when I ask for time off, and it's one of the downsides to working for a small firm. You know that you're needed, and that's the plus side for working for a small firm. I love the exposure it's given me. I'm able to do a lot of things that you wouldn't be able to at an associate level. I have helped interview clients and open new cases, and have seen a case go from start all the way to trial, which is really exciting, because as I said, most cases don't even make it to trial. But because you're needed, I feel obligated to be there all of the time, and that's not great for anyone. So I think that has actually been, and I would encourage you, if you have vacation days, you should use them, because apparently in the United States, there's some crazy stat of how few people actually use their vacation days, and it's worth it, and everyone would actually appreciate if you took a day off.
Yeah. All right. So in the interest of time and the interest of hearing from you all and wanting them to talk more about what you all want to hear, Lizzie is making her way up front to get the microphone. Is there any quick thing that you all wanted to share that we didn't get to cover? I know I had a couple other questions for you all, but we'll just have to schedule a round two. But is there anything you wanted to share really quickly before we take audience questions?
No, thanks for coming. It's been great,
About that,
it's
yeah.
been great to have a mic.
When
You are
I
welcome
was just going to law school, I think there were too many lawyers. And there could be, for all I know, there could be still too many lawyers. But I've just experienced that there are definitely some fields of law that could use some bright new minds. My areas of probate and elder law, we always, sometimes I have to turn work away because I only have so much time. So, and then I can refer work to people I know who will do a good job. But I'm always, I'd like to, there's room for more attorneys in many areas of law.
Right.
And also when it comes to Catholic social justice, I can see in this country's near future, I think we're definitely going to need some bright Catholic lawyers as well to fight for Catholics' rights. So those are important issues for new attorneys.
Sure. Thanks for that encouragement. All right. Where did Lizzie go? Where'd she go? There you go. Ah. Who has a question for our guests? Megan in the back.
Hello, thank you all for coming. This is a question that Mr. Vieira touched on a little bit, but I was just wondering, especially in the law field, have you ever had a situation or a time when you felt like you were pressured or, almost compelled to compromise your conscience or your beliefs, or have you ever witnessed any of your colleagues doing something which didn't sit well with your idea of what's right?
I can't say that I have. There's been times when my clients didn't follow my advice. But I've never been faced with a crisis of conscience like that.
It's difficult for me to say. I think the closest analog that I would have is when I was working in the public defender's office. There was a case which I started working on, but because I was new to the office, I was under the supervision of another attorney. And the case that we were working on ended up getting settled basically at the full asking price given by the prosecutor. Again, it may not sit well on short reflection, but a lot of cases that come through the public defender's office and others end up settling out for the nature of the circumstances. What you're really looking for is the satisfaction of the client with the offer that the prosecutor is making, and if you have to wrangle for a better one, you wrangle as much as you can, and if you can't get a good offer, then you go to trial and see what the judge is willing to give. That's at least the basic strategy in a nutshell. There's a lot more nuance to it, but the way that this case ended up settling didn't seem to me to involve any kind of disputation about what was going on. And while the client accepted it, it was at that particular juncture that I thought something wasn't right about the way that that was just handed to the prosecutor, essentially. But that's probably the closest analog that I have at this point. I've had the good fortune of serving under very concerned and very ethical lawyers. In fact, the majority of them, through no fault of my own, being Catholic. So the fact that I've had that exposure means that I have very little actual experience with what may be termed the darker side of law, where people take advantage of things that shouldn't actually be taken advantage of, even if it is for your client's benefit.
Rebecca, did you have a response to that?
I don't necessarily have something to add if we want to save time for a question.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, Blake over here.
Hello, thanks for coming. I was related to Megan's question. I was kind of wondering about how you even defend someone who is guilty, like without like making it seem like what they did is correct, but like with trying to do your job and respect their integrity.
I practiced criminal law for 6 or 7 years, and the way I look at it is the prosecutor's got a job and the defense attorney's got a job. So often you see prosecutors who are seeking an excessive punishment. All right, so if we do our job correctly, we can even that out and have a more just outcome for that person, and try to achieve a more appropriate sentence. And also just make sure that the police and the system are working correctly. Right. One of my favorite moments as a young attorney was when I won my first motion to suppress evidence. I was actually using the Constitution. It was a minor case, but I felt happy because this police officer should have never stopped my client and arrested him. He was acting on a hunch without any real basis. So that worked. That police officer learned his lesson, and that the prosecutor that day, would have probably, after that case was done, would have gone and given that police officer a lecture. So if we do our job correctly, we can help the whole criminal legal system improve.
Right. And just as a brief addition to that, I think there are two things. Is one, not even Socrates ever found out what justice was. So I think when it comes to a practical application of what justice is, you do have to take into account every person's situation, even the guy who shot up heroin, right, and then crashed his car into a saloon. Even that person has something to be said for him which can be put to his advantage, and he deserves a hearing of it, whatever and however it may affect the outcome. And the second thing is just a summary of Phil's point, which is just, the defense attorney's job is to keep the prosecutor and the police honest. That's really the summary of it, because the prosecutor already has an ethical duty to only prosecute such cases as he deems are worth prosecuting, in the sense of justice will be achieved in the prosecution of that case. Sometimes the prosecutors are not too careful of that ethical obligation, and so you have to push back on them, which is partially why I wanted to become a prosecutor in my first estimation of what I would do as a job out of law school, because then I would have that more authority in the position to say, well, this one is not going forward, or that one is going forward, and in that sense, work from a position of honesty in the first place.
And just one quick point off that, if anyone likes listening to podcasts, there's a podcast that I love listening to. It's called The Prosecutors, originally and uniquely named. But it's two prosecutors who go through a lot of unsolved cases. And one of the reasons they started this podcast is to try to draw awareness to those specific cases, so that maybe people who have evidence or related facts about those cases could help resolve them, similar to how that serial case was reopened, actually, because of a podcast. So if you would like to get started on something and want to listen more about it, they talk a lot about criminal cases because that's specifically what they cover. But if you do start at the very beginning, because they build up through it with a lot of the legal lingo that you might need later on, and they'll reference back other episodes that they discussed certain particular things. So that might be a fun listen if you're ever just walking and don't have someone to talk to or driving somewhere.
And sometimes as a criminal defense attorney as well, yes, they may be guilty, but maybe as part of the case, you can help arrange for a better outcome that will maybe keep them out of jail and get maybe even keep the record clean if they complete some substance abuse treatment or mental health, get some mental health help as well. So you can help the person improve their life as well.
Yeah.
Nice. Yes, up here.
How many hours of work do you put in a week?
For me, it depends. I'd say anywhere from 50 to 65.
It's basically a 40-hour work week for me.
It might be between that for me. It definitely depends on the week. Like we had a case go to trial and I was working all the time. And then other weeks might be a little bit slow. So it's nice. I think my boss is pretty conscious of that fact and allows for slower weeks than others. But I also work at a small firm where they don't necessarily have like that expectation of working all the time.
Larger firms will have higher, stricter expectations of you, but
Right.
a smaller law firm tends to be more reasonable.
Yeah. So if you like high-powered, very active type A situations, you probably want to consider that as well when you're looking at what firm you want to work at. So just another thing to bear in mind.
Okay. All right, next question, all the way in the back. Is that you, Zoe? Yeah.
So work is always going to be work, but I'm sure most of us would like to find something we're more suited to than not suited to. How does being a liberal arts student, Christendom student, translate into the legal field? Do you think that there's a particular major that's translated well into law? What skills did you take from Christendom that you're like, oh, this has made me a good lawyer? What natural skills does a lawyer need? What kind of person do you think would be inclined to enjoy law?
I have a very quick example that I feel very strongly about. I think being a student, homeschool student, and then Christendom student, I saw a stark contrast between my experience at CUA and then at Georgetown, simply from the class size. The class size at CUA was very small, and the class size at Georgetown were very large. And students, for whatever reason, at Georgetown did not raise their hand almost at all. There were maybe a few, and they were considered gunners, and I resent that. I was not for the record, not a gunner, but I did resent the fact that we shamed people for asking questions, and then in the legal field complain that lawyers assume they know things, and that's when you really get into trouble, speaking as someone who helps sue other lawyers. If you do not understand the limits to your own knowledge, you're going to run into trouble. So it starts in law school, and I think being a homeschool student, I obviously had a relationship with my professor, but then going to Christendom, I think it allows you to understand that the professor is a human being as well and has interest in you learning as well and is there for you to talk to and ask questions. So I went in with that attitude into law school, and I actually saw some students were surprised that I was at all interested in the professors. Like it was even to that extreme, but very easy transition, I think, going into law school, being able to ask questions, getting to know the professors outside of the school. I think, I'm not gonna say this for everyone, maybe you'll come across differently, but I think because of that experience you have at Christendom, understanding the human being who's teaching you, you come across as a human being who also is interested in this other person. Law students who seek out professors outside of the classroom can come across as very mercenary and just interested in schmoozing and trying to get the grade and trying to get the internship. I've seen that happen, and it was very uncomfortable. So I think that is an easy example of how Christendom and smaller schools help prepare you, that they make you a more engaged student, and you're more open to learn and able to interact with a professor. That goes a long way. I was able to transfer because I had gotten to know one professor very well at CUA who wrote my letter of recommendation, which is a difficult thing to get from a professor at a school because you're choosing to leave their school. And through a couple instances. Actually, for the record, I really find this professor very dear. She and I had disagreements over the present election that was happening, presidential election, and she had also shared that she was Catholic. She shared that with the class, and I went to her office and challenged her on that, and to her credit, she was open and dialogued with me on that and actually wrote me my letter of recommendation. So I think, God bless her, she's so great. But I think your Christendom education philosophy, you understand how to read difficult material. You understand, I hope, you understand how to read difficult material. You understand how to outline. You understand the importance of writing. You're having to do that all the time. Those are all skills that easily transfer to law school.
Your writing skills that you can develop here, really work hard on developing your writing skills. That's going to be key. Philosophy and logic, just learning how to think. And history is great because you're trying to prepare your mind with a large amount of details. That's always good, and being able to, I don't know, just...
If you hate memorizing dates, you are going to hate memorizing statutory citations. So consider that as well. Because one of the things which I would highly recommend for anyone thinking about going into law or to law school, Chester Belloc Debate Society. You have got to be able to think and speak and react. And I'm deadly serious. You need to be able to think, speak, and react as quick as lightning, because a judge is going to look at you one day.
If you want to be in litigation. There are
Right.
two types of lawyers. You can easily split two. There are some lawyers who never want to see the face of a client, never want to see anyone, and they sit in the room, which is awesome. They write brilliant briefs, and those briefs are filed in court, or they provide the arguments for the lawyers who are going to court. So if you... some of the lawyers I met who make the most money never actually have to stand on their feet and talk to anyone. So there is that aspect too. But
I
if
wish
you're going to litigation,
I wish I had had more public speaking opportunities. I've taken that up more often when I was here.
no one wishes I had more public speaking opportunities. Thank you, Kristen, for letting me come.
You're very welcome. Anytime. Did you want to?
Oh, I could go on about that for a
Okay,
long
well-
time, but I'll let it go.
Okay. Other questions? What do we got? Anthony in the back.
So kind of going off of what Mr. Vieira was talking about earlier with what he struggles with a little bit, I was curious if any of you guys have ever done any pro bono work, and how common it is to do pro bono work as a lawyer over the course of your career.
It's encouraged, and everyone ought to do some. The rules that govern us strongly encourage us to put in a certain amount every year. It depends on what job you have. If you work for the government, you're not necessarily going to have too many opportunities. If you're in private practice like me, I have many opportunities, as many as I want. And there's also not just, for example, I participated in Wills for Heroes, where we provided free wills and other documents for police, firefighters, and EMTs. We also had a Wills for Veterans program where we provided these documents for veterans. So there's always programs like that in your local networks. There's also low bono opportunities. Low bono meaning you're getting paid, you're typically appointed by a court to represent someone who's poor in this case, and you're not going to get paid very much. So whereas if someone had hired me privately to do this, I would make 10 times as much. So that's low bono. It adds up, and it's good experience. So those opportunities can come in various ways, sometimes in criminal defense cases. I also had, as a guardian ad litem, which you mentioned in my bio, guardian ad litem for incapacitated adults. So if someone is poor and they're incapacitated, they need, there's a court case going on to where we want to appoint someone as their guardian. So I would be appointed by the court to go meet with them and figure out, do they really need a guardian, and what are their needs? And so those are cases where you're not getting paid very much. So there's also guardian ad litem for children as well, in custody battles and other difficult situations. So we're always in need of more of those types of pro bono lawyers as well.
Anything on pro bono?
There are opportunities for that in, for example, state aid societies. So the Public Defender's Office is a perfect example of being essentially a state-employed low bono attorney. Another one would be legal aid. In the local area, you have housing assistance as well, housing assistance attorneys, so like Blue Ridge, and blanking on the other one, but they provide assistance to low-income tenants who are facing troubles from their landlords for whatever reason, and they'll assess cases and work for them at lower rates. So there are employment opportunities that provide exclusively that kind of work. And again, depending on the job that you are in, you may have be facing certain restrictions. For example, when I was in the public defender's office, I was specifically restricted from taking pro bono work. It was not allowed as far as my terms of service were concerned. So right now, the firm that I'm working with is not able to take on pro bono work for different reasons, but it's not something which we are against in that sense, but we're just not able to accommodate it at this time.
A common debate, or not, a discussion in law school, if you go to big law, you don't have enough time to take on pro bono cases, or you go to smaller firms, you might have more time, but the fact is larger law firms often have more resources, and so there is just, it's funny, it's like that balance. You might be able to take one pro bono case, but you have all of the large law firms' resources to help move that case along, and then you're in a smaller firm and you just don't have the time. So,
Right.
Okay, let's take one more question, and then if you all want to ask individual questions, they're willing to hang out for a little bit. So, is that you, Kaylee?
Thank you so much for what you've had to say. Really quickly, could you just share any lessons you may have learned from your work here that doesn't just apply to the work you do as a lawyer, but something you've learned specifically from being a lawyer that you can apply to other aspects of your life?
Yes.
Take vacations, as Rebecca said?
Yeah. That's definitely one. You need to have the time off to separate yourself from your client's problems. You got to be able to build low walls, and if you need to add between them, being able to put distance between you and somebody else's emotional needs when it comes to helping people who are in essentially the most emotional time of their lives for one reason or another is really important. Particularly if you go, I would say, into either criminal defense work, family law, or estates litigation. Because on the one hand, in criminal law, they're literally facing a jail sentence, and nobody wants somebody else really to go to jail. And frankly, the client never does either. It really ruins their Saturday nights. But with things that you might not think about, estates can be one of the nastiest disputes that you will ever enter into outside of a family law dispute, because you are talking to people who are, for one reason or another, fighting tooth and nail over grandma's $2 bill that she had from the last printing, that was ever made of these things. And no, it was promised to me, and she wrote it down in this, and well, you're a jerk for not wanting to have that, so I'm going to take you to court and spend $12,000 of your money out of the estate, and the entire estate will be dwindled away. If you read Bleak House by Charles Dickens, you'll know that this kind of thing can go on and essentially waste away the value of an estate simply in the client's eyes on a matter of what they consider principle. And that's where you have to be able to distance yourself from the client's viewpoint and say, well, look, is it really worth taking your half-brother to court over this issue if it's going to lose you everything that you would possibly gain out of this estate? So
one of my biggest sources of new business, new clients, is word-of-mouth referrals.
Mm-hmm.
So providing your best work and providing direct personal communication, it applies in whatever field you choose. So providing good professional service to people, and advertising in church bulletins, that's always good. But not only do they want to see your name in the church bulletin, they want to talk to someone in their parish. Do you trust this person? So you see plumbers and attorneys and dentists in the church bulletins, but they always want to talk to someone and hear something good about you. So and the vice versa works as well. So bad service can result in bad referrals as well. So
I think I know what you mean by the question. It's a little bit difficult to answer because one thing that's very exciting about the law is it applies to every aspect of your life and everything that you could, in your exchange in the cafeteria, there are potential lawsuits. Not against the school, but there could always happen. Life happens and the law affects those areas. So I remember in my first year of law school, driving home from law school, I would turn the radio on, and without a doubt, there would be at least one thing the person said on the radio that related to a legal case or just something related to the law in some way. So I've always joked that the law is for people who have you could be very strongly interested in one thing, but not have the talent for that one thing, and the back door is going into law and practicing in that area. So I met people who went into sports law and were specialists in baseball contracts, that sort of thing, and could not throw a pitch for their life, but they could then be in the area. And I met someone who went into beverage law who, which that's a plug if you want to go to law school. She's in beverage law and has work meetings in Napa Valley because they work with wine companies. I was like, that's a life hack. But it's hard because it applies to everything. But to take the question back and say, what did I personally learn in practicing the law is definitely self-awareness. Like, law school is extremely stressful, and when you put yourself through something like that, I think you come out with a better understanding of yourself, and that also applies to everything because you are the common denominator between everything that you experience. And so if you have a better understanding of yourself, it'll improve your personal relationships and your professional relationships. So.
Okay, well, as a really quick wrap up before we thank them for all of their time, I just wanted to remind you all, I am happy to help you all if you want to pursue law school. If you want to talk more about what they talked about, please come see me. You know how to book an appointment. I am currently helping at least one or two students research law schools, figure out what needs to happen to make it a reality. And so I just want you to know that I am here to help you through the process. We have tons of resources. I assume you all are willing to be resources for our students and answer questions, maybe via email. And then I feel like there was one other thing I was going to say, but I have forgot it at the moment. I do want to just remind you all that this is the last Life on Tap for this semester. We will do another 3 or 4 in the spring semester. And the topics and dates are to be determined at the moment. So I would love some feedback if you all have ideas of other careers you want to hear from people about. And then, I just cannot remember the last thing, but it'll come to me. We do need a couple helpers if you are willing to stay to put the comments back in order for breakfast tomorrow morning. But with that, I'm going to say thank you so much. I learned a lot. I don't know if you all did, but I feel better prepared to help you all consider law school. Yes, I'm going to go to law school.
You almost made me want to go back to law school.
Okay. Maybe you'll be a professor. Maybe. But I appreciate you all so much and taking your time, and you're working 50, 60, 70 hours a week, and still you're making time to be out here. So give them a round of applause, and thank you. They are willing to stay for a little bit, so if you want to have a chance to speak to them individually, come on up.